Hi there. I'm Grandpa Jack Hasling, and I'd like to read to you a story from a book that I wrote called Salamander the Great. Now, in order for you to understand the story, you have to know that sometimes salamanders are called newts. You also have to know a little bit about Alexander the Great, too. Oh, and if your mom and dad would like to listen, that's okay, too. Now, the tail of a newt may appear rather bland and without an exceptional feature. But before I am through, I am sure you will cheer for this semi-aquatical creature. This newt's name was Sal, and he had royal blood. His father was known as King Phil. He resided in old Macedonia land, near a pond by the side of a hill. Now, it's possible I had imagined the scene, but I believe my perception was real, that a volume of classical stories one day fell out of a bookmobile. It landed face up on the banks of a pond where this curious newt was reclining. He was just dozing off when he noticed the book in the grass where the sun was shining. Now, Sal was a very unusual newt, with the cut of a natural leader. Most important of all was the singular fact that Sal was an avid reader. He opened the book and spent many days eating nothing but crackers and cheese, and all through the night he devoured the works of Homer and Sophocles. He dreamed of Ulysses and Oedipus, too, and envisioned a glorious fate. He would conquer the world if his destiny called and become Salamander the Great. Of course, to pursue this ambitious career, an army would have to be crafted, and he wasn't so sure how his friends would respond to a notice that they would be drafted. So he purchased an ad in the local Tribune for adventurous souls to enlist, but he found with chagrin that the offer he made was not very hard to resist. Something is wrong, he concluded at last. It's important to me that I know it. He consulted his friend, Aristotle, the frog, philosopher, teacher, and poet. Now, a philosopher's job is to think of great thoughts, full of logical, helpful suggestions. Aristotle the frog was the one you would ask about answers to difficult questions. For you to become Salamander the Great, you'll need more than an earnest desire. Courage, compassion, good judgment, and wit are qualities you must acquire. You must have a quest, a need you can fill in the lives of the people you serve. Only then will the title of greatness be one that you truly can say you deserve. Well, Sal knew right away Aristotle's advice was something that had to be heeded. What's more, he had thought of a cause to pursue that was noble and desperately needed. The oppression of worms, a dastardly crime that hardly anyone fights, for somehow invertebrates never are seen as creatures who have civil rights. All the worms in the pond had to fear for their lives, and often they shuddered and shook when they thought of how likely it was that they'd be impaled on a fisherman's hook. So he mustered the lot of them into a band and trained them in weaponry skills. He taught them saluting and marching in step and disciplined, close-ordered drills. Sal rallied his troops and he shouted, "To arms! Put an end to injustice and terror." But the sensible minds in this army of worms saw his plan was in grievous error. "It's madness," they said, "to advance on a foe when we have so little protection. They'll cut us to shreds and use us for bait if we don't make a major correction." Reluctantly, Sal was forced to agree that a frontal attack would be futile. He'd have to devise an alternative plan that was not so potentially brutal. He confessed to his friend, Aristotle the frog, a new plan would need to be drawn. The philosopher smiled and said it was true that brains would win out over brawn. "Consider the premise," the teacher began. "Why the lives of the worms are at stake. The reason the fishermen want them for bait is because there are fish in the lake. Now, philosophers tend to leave matters obscure and let you figure them out on your own. So Sal had to ponder the meaning implied in this thought Aristotle had sown. "Eureka!" he cried, having borrowed a term that he gleaned from his classical letters. "Those anglers will learn that the worms and the newts are their intellectual betters. But to put into practice the plan that I have to resist this hostile invasion, I'll first need to find an orator who is skilled in the art of persuasion. I'll have to recruit all the trout in the pond. To do it myself is my wish. But in spite of my classical background, I fear, I don't speak the language of fish." Then up from the water a catfish appeared and said, "I'm your man, if you please." "Who are you?" asked Sal. And the catfish replied, "My name is Demosthenes. I can speak to the fish and win their support. I can even deliver their vote. But do me a favor," he said with a cough. "Get this pebble out of my throat." Sal gently extracted the tiny obstruction, relieving his friend of distress. Then together they worked on the salient points of the orator's major address. "The fish must become our trusted allies if we have any hope to succeed. By standing up boldly and seizing the day, Macedonia will be freed. The strategy must be simple and swift. When the fishermen start to come near, all the fish in the pond must get out of sight till the coast is finally clear. When the fishermen come in to cast in their lines, their efforts will all be for naught. For none of the fish who live in that pond will ever again be caught." Well, it happened that way. And the word went around that you never would find a trout. And strange as it seemed, that bountiful pond had apparently been fished out. Now the fish and all of the worms and the newts are happy to be alive. They know that they and all of their kin have a much better chance to survive. They're grateful for Aristotle the frog and the wisdom that he could impart, and certainly for Demosthenes and the practice of his art. But for the creatures of Macedonia, no person will ever equate with the most beloved of all their leaders, the famous Salamander the Great. Thank you.